and a very warm welcome to this, another edition of the Coaching Hour podcast. We're getting back to that time of the year where I think a warm welcome is needed here in Johannesburg. Fresh this morning, fresh overnight, although still way better than they have it in the Northern Hemisphere. If that's where you are watching from, you're heading into summer, we're heading into winter, and we may well still be warmer than you. On that note, a very warm welcome from myself, Paul Rotherham, and the team. Welcome to this, another edition of the Coaching Hour podcast. As you know, Bry now, there we go. There's a South Africanism. As you know, Bry now, this is brought to you in partnership with Coaches Network South Africa. Mareka, we have a wonderful guest lined up for today's episode. My brain's asleep.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Paul. We are very privileged to have Julian de la Hunt with us as guest today. He's the owner of Eye2Eye Africa and a senior partner in the international business based in Manchester, UK. As part of the unique behavioral and high performance coaching methodology, Julian and Eye2Eye has worked with international sporting teams, Olympic athletes, golfers, tennis players, cricket franchises, among others. So we are very privileged, Julian, to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much. The privilege is all mine. Thanks for the time.
Perfect. We are going to talk about coping in a high-performing, environment. But before we get into our topic, Julian, tell us a bit about who is Julian and how did you get on this journey? And just before we went online, we actually spoke of the fact that you are yourself a high performer with many hats that you wear. So tell us a bit more about your journey.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So my journey, I spent a fair amount of my career, in early career, sort of in the industrial psychology space, head of human resources at various blue chip organizations. And by the time I reached 30, I was like, well, I ticked all the boxes that you typically set yourself out to tick. And I was like, well, I'm good at what I do, but am I passionate and do I love it? And at the time, my wife runs a travel business and she'd gone across to one of their travel conferences, and the guest speaker there was a guy by the name of Mike Finnegan. Him and I connected over time and started building this business. He was the founder of Eye2Eye, Impossible to Inevitable. And over the last sort of 12 years, I suppose my journey hasn't gone anywhere the way I would have expected it, but I'd set my mind to what I was wanting to achieve. I wanted to be on TV, I wanted to be on radio, I wanted to be an expert in certain spaces, had no clue how that was going to happen. And within sort of the first 6 months of leaving corporate, I had found myself in a space of high performance, sports psychology, behavioural psychology. I was working in the English Premier League. I was doing the sports rap on SABC with Eben Janssen and his team. And I was like, wow, all the stuff that I'd set my mind to is actually becoming a reality. It was really sort of starting to happen. And on that journey, I've got a coffee shop and I've got a high performance sports business, sports psychology, leadership, behavioral change. I've got a moringa farming business. I knew nothing about farming or moringa 8 years ago. And now we've grown the biggest moringa business in Southern Africa. Sports agency where I look after young footballers, cricketers, rugby players around the world. So there's a lot on the plate, but my passion is really where I can make a major difference with South African individuals and people around the world. I've got clients in Saudi and Dubai and New York, and I've been privileged to speak on some of the biggest stages, which is just absolutely, I love everything that I do, which is awesome.
Just to clarify, Julian, you said that you are based here in South Africa, but it's a British-based business that you're in partnership with. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're based out of Manchester, and then obviously I'm based in South Africa, so I look after Africa from a coaching point of view. But I often find myself, working with international golfers, British athletics, et cetera, et cetera.
And where in South Africa, out of interest?
Out of interest, are you going to come find me? So I'm based in Irene in Centurion.
Okay, lovely. No, I was just checking because we have people on this show who are from the Cape, and then we have people from, well, pretty much all over the country. And I always find that people in the Cape are just slightly more chilled and laid back, and where the Joburgers are on fire, Joburg and Pretoria. You are certainly somebody who appears to be on fire, which is wonderful.
Well, let me know if you need me to slow down.
No. This is brilliant. Wonderful. We love it. Infectious energy.
Awesome.
Yes, absolutely. So Julian, you spoke about, high performance in sport as well, but in today's business environment, how would you define high performance?
So I think, I mean, for me, high performance it's about consistent, accountable execution over time. So I often get asked, how do we change human behavior? How do we influence human behavior? There's no quick fix. There's no magic wand. We talk about it, and I'm sure, all your coaches and people who are in the coaching space, we talk about incremental steps to success, marginal gains. In other words, what am I doing consistently that makes me better today than I was yesterday, and tomorrow I'm better than I was today. So for me, it's about not short bursts, but execution over time. It's about being completely clear on what is expected, aligned to a common goal, and I suppose taking ownership of that. And I think ownership is thrown around in high performance teams, and we throw the word ownership around, so flippantly these days. But it's not just about results. I think, to come back to your question, it's not just about results. It's about how we get those results. How do we achieve those results? So if performance comes at the cost of burnout and disengagement or chaos, or then it's not sustainable, and that's not a high performance environment. So for me, it's
Yes.
really about the ability to deliver strong, repeatable results within a culture of, let's call it, clarity and accountability over
Mm.
time.
Mm. I think there's some employees out there that might feel like their environment is high performance because the workload is so high. They have to multitask. When people resign, there's no replacements. So in essence, they feel like because the environment is so busy and there's so much to do and you never get, in front, it feels like you're stuck in a high performance or high performing environment. But what you are referring to is something very different.
No, absolutely. And I think that's such a great point you make. I walk into organizations, they go, we're a high performing environment, but really they're a pressure cooker environment. The pressure is
Mm,
very high, so they feel that it's a high performance environment, but they haven't learned how to operate effectively within that space. And I think,
mm.
that's what sets high performing teams apart from, let's call it, whatever the opposite of high
Yes,
performing teams is they have the ability to operate within high pressure environments.
yes, and be, I guess, productive or efficient within those environments. Yeah, we've had a
Absolutely.
few, we have had a few guests, speaking about burnout and so on. But I would like to know from you, because you do work with people in high performance environments, what ultimately leads to burnout? What is some of those causes?
I think, I mean, there's so much we can go through, but I think for me, in my experience, where we talk about, well, we tolerate mistakes, but we
Mm,
actually don't. I often find organizations go, this is a safe space. But when you speak to the individuals, when you get to the crux of the matter, mistakes are less tolerable, and people would either hide it or it adds additional
mm,
pressure. So for me, that's one of the main reasons to burnout, is this additional pressure that people put on themselves around, well, I cannot make mistakes. We're under scrutiny. Every conversation is recorded these days. I sit in these meetings and I go, goodness me, there's no space to hide, because everything's recorded, and I can come back and I can say to you, well, you agreed that we were going to do this, and now you've made a mistake, or you haven't performed in alignment with what we'd agreed. So there's no space to hide. And I think what I'm finding first and foremost is the additional pressures that are put on individuals, both from a work point of view, and then there's the silent killer. People are just struggling at home. They're struggling from so many different perspectives, and they don't have their things together from a holistic point of view. So, it ultimately plays out in the workspace as well.
We've often spoken to many coaches, in fact, have echoed what you're saying in terms of performing well, and we all want to achieve our goals and be successful. Obviously, that success can be measured very subjectively based on what's important to you. But are you finding, Julian, that generally at the moment in the workplace, the expectations and goals are realistic? Or are you finding that employees are being placed under more and more pressure that is simply unsustainable?
I think that's spot on as well. I think the unsustainable part is really what causes this sort of this additional pressure beyond my performance agreement, my KPAs, my KPIs, etc., etc. I think there is a lot of that. And when we talk high performance teams, we always refer to control versus chaos. In teams where there's a apparent chaos, in other words, there's just so much going on, the goalposts shift, there's additional pressures, whether it's stakeholder pressure, whether it's client pressure, whether it's the petrol price, whatever it might be, adding additional pressure, it causes chaos. And high-performing teams flourish in areas where they control the controllables and they eliminate the chaos. And I think you would see that in many teams and organizations. There just seems to be a lot of gray area. There's a lot of noise in the system on a constant basis, and I think that adds to that pressure cooker environment.
Sounds like a very simple solution, doesn't it? Just get rid of the chaos, he said, very easily. Do you find, and I guess this may come across as a silly question in a sense, but do you find that this is largely money driven, that everything comes down to bottom line these days?
I think it's quite a general statement, and I don't think it's obviously not a stupid question, but I think yes, obviously there's massive pressure, financial bottom line pressure. I think individuals themselves are finding their own bottom line financial pressures, and you throw those two together, plus the ambiguity, plus the uncertainty, and it's a recipe for pressure, a pressure environment that we don't have the ability to cope with in.
And how many people get it right? Obviously, this is the sales pitch where Julian can talk about how well eye to eye does. But in a real world, how many people are kind of living this in a picture that you look forward to seeing and that looks right?
I think a lot of people get it right. Are they getting it perfectly right? Absolutely not. But that's not what we strive for. We strive for getting better every day. So I think yes, there are many people, and it's typically the organizations and the leaders who 100% take accountability, who are prepared to be vulnerable and say, I don't know everything. So it's okay to bring a coach. It's okay to bring a high performance team into my space, and walk a journey with them, because it's really around the learning aspect. So yes, I mean, Springbok Rugby is getting it right in 8 years versus what they looked like, 8 or 9 years ago. And that's because of accountability, clear communication lines, and strong leadership that really knows where they want to go. Doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. Doesn't mean they're not going to get the results every day and every match that they were looking for. But it's about working within the ambit of strategy and a vision that we're trying to achieve.
I think you've said something there that's very important, and I don't want to let it go by, Julian, and that is the Springbok rugby team taking essentially 8 years. Not that there weren't great times within that 8 year period, but I'm finding now more than ever the pressure is on, which is one thing, but there's also an unrealistic timeline in many instances where not only must it be right, but it's got to be right tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it boils down to setting clear priorities, defining those roles, and then having measurable outcomes. One can very quickly get derailed by an instant, a shareholder, pressurizing from the board, whatever it might be. We need to have those clear priorities to constantly come back to and say, are we still heading in the direction? I'm going on holiday to Cape Town. Yes, I've had a flat somewhere in the Karoo. Does that derail me, or is it a temporary obstacle? But we still know as a family we're going on holiday to Cape Town. It's really about keeping the vision, keeping the structure, understanding who's driving the vehicle, who's accountable for what are the roles of each person, and then you'll find that these temporary pressure situations are easier to smooth over than not.
Mary?
Hi, Julian. So, can you give us 3 tips in the workplace of how to identify, first of all, that there is a problem with pressure where people are burning out? What can they do? What can the manager do? Because it's not only the managers that feel like they are burning out, it's also the subordinates that are under so much pressure to perform targets, and like you say, the home pressure of finance is also back of mind, so they don't want to lose their job, but they're really not coping with the pressure. What 3 things can you give us that will help get onto this line of recovery and
Sure. Okay. Three things. Let me give that a bit of thought. But so I mean, you can't perform at a high level consistently if you deplete it. I think that's the first thing, that you can't give what you don't have. So for me, clear rules of engagement. In other words, do we have the ideal week? And I often in teams we talk about the recovery time. The downtime is almost more important in many instances than game day. And if you think about, if I just again use Springbok rugby or any professional sport for that matter, we often spend more time on the downtime than on match day. So is there a safe space for you? Do you know what you do with that downtime? Are you effectively recovering during those downtimes, that restful period? Because if you're not, well, people say, well, I'm sleeping 7 hours a day, I should be fine, but I'm not. Well, are you effectively sleeping 7 hours a day? Are you taking that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes for yourself during the day and truly recovering? Because nobody, no engine, no vehicle can run at full steam all the time. If the Springboks, if any Real Madrid, if Liverpool, or whatever the teams, I won't throw some of the teams' names out that we've worked with, but if they worked at full speed all the time, match day wouldn't work nearly as well as you see it, on any given Saturday. So open communication, clear communication for me from a leadership point of view, within an organization, within a team, safe, accountable spaces, and regular check-ins. Those for me are the most important. If you're asking for three, those three would be the most important: regular check-ins, clear communication, and leadership that have clearly established the rules of engagement and what our space looks like when it's good, and obviously when we're under pressure.
Jumping in there, Julian, realistically speaking, if I look at my circle, and I don't rub shoulders with millionaires, so perhaps it's maybe a more representative circle than perhaps someone like yourself, who is largely dealing with a lot of people who are seemingly successful and probably wealthy as a result. But if I look in my circle, I'm finding people are generally having to work more and more, inverted commas, literally having what they would refer to as their full-time job, and then a side hustle, and then probably doing something over the weekend. If I look at my own life and give a perfect example of that, I've probably got 5 or 6 different things, let's call them that I'm working on. And I find if I look back to 15 years ago, I was able to survive very comfortably having what people would refer to as one job. Those days for me, and what I'm seeing for many others, have changed. The result is, and I watched a very interesting podcast about this the other day. I don't know if you watch any of the Diary of a CEO content.
Yeah, love it.
I watched a really interesting podcast where he spoke about traveling to the airport early in the morning, and he was fetched by a guy in an Uber at 2 a.m. to get to where he needed to be. And he got chatting with this guy. This guy obviously recognized him, and they got talking. And he said, I'm working 3 jobs at the moment. And it's not because I'm saving up for a brand new car or I'm going on holiday twice a year. It's because I'm paying the bills. And if either one of those or any of one of those 3 disappear, as a family, we're in trouble. And he was thinking about this and reflecting on it. And he said, more and more, this seems to be the case. Now, if that's the picture, where and how do you switch off? Because that, and I'm being vulnerable here, that's my challenge. I just find I don't switch off. And you alluded to it now with the sleep. I check my Garmin every morning and it gives me my sleep patterns and I see how well I didn't sleep. And the point is that it's very difficult when you're juggling all these balls, and you have to have all of them. You can't just have one anymore.
Yeah. I think, you've probably hit the nail on the head for, so many people out there. It may have sounded, massively sort of impressive when I've said to you, I've got all these businesses, but most of those came out of necessity, not because I necessarily, during COVID, my sports and performance psychology business almost ground to a complete halt. My wife runs a travel business that, no one was traveling for a year out of South Africa, in and out of South Africa. So we had to create other spaces, other incomes. And I find that for a long period, up until probably, the last 6 months, I was operating much like you, Paul, at full speed without giving yourself the opportunity to recover. And I think you need to be purposeful. I talk about the ideal week. So what does your ideal week look like? And in that ideal week, you need to have non-negotiable spaces, whether that's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever works for you. In my case, it can literally be 10 minutes kicking the ball outside in the garden. At 4:46, that does it for me still. Like I'm good to kick a football for a little bit and I'm good to go again. It may mean, you think that, well, taking a bit of time off or relaxing. I don't relax when I'm taking time off in front of my laptop. Definitely not, because there's emails streaming in, there's WhatsApp that's relentless. That's the reality of the worlds we live in. So we have to create spaces where before work, for example, this is just a small tidbit from our side. I've now set a very, very particular start date to the morning. I don't look at my phone before 8:30 in the morning. Sometimes it's really difficult because historically, 5:30, the alarm goes off. I look at my alarm and I go, shucks, did I get the kind of sleep I needed? Absolutely not. But I'm already into it. Before I know it, by 10 o'clock, I've done a day's worth of work. That no longer happens. I have purposefully slowed down to give myself the space where I can reflect, where I can set goals for the day, where I can read a little, which I just couldn't do at 10 o'clock at night because I was exhausted. So you need to be purposeful, and each of us operates on a different cycle and a different clock. So you need to be very aware, and that's a lot of the work that we do, is when are you at your best? When do you relax at your best? And then work your schedule around that. It's not always practical if you work in a factory environment or in a space where your hours are dictated. But again, when you're in that sort of space, have open conversations with your leadership and make it very clear that if you're wanting me to operate at full speed, I do need time to look after myself as well. And I know I've spoken a lot there, but there's one analogy that I love so much. The two they're working in the forest with their axes. They're chopping wood. The two wood choppers and the one wood chopper every day at about lunchtime just disappears. The other wood chopper keeps going, and at the end of the day, they've both chopped about the same amount of wood. And the disgruntled one says to the other, "Well, what's going on here? I'm working extra hard, even in the hour that you disappear, seemingly doing nothing. What are you doing during that hour?" And the wood chopper says to him, "Well, I'm sharpening my blade. I'm sharpening my axe during that hour." Now, that's the reality. If we don't have time to sharpen our axe, we're just working extraordinarily hard, but not necessarily smart.
Yeah. Wonderful analogy. Thanks for that, Julian. And I think you've touched on something there with your phone that is a very easy step and a very easy thing to implement in our lives, is to say, right, I am physically switching off my phone, or I'm turning off the notifications, or whatever I'm doing for this particular window. Because it's very easy to talk about this, and very often it's far more difficult to implement. But I do think there are some simple steps and things where you don't need to now completely reinvent things and reschedule your whole life. I do the same on my phone. My phone doesn't ring, doesn't beep. I've mentioned it a few times on the coaching hour, and I think people sometimes think I'm crazy. But if you call me, I'll see that you've called. There's a good chance that I might miss your call at the time, but I'll phone you back. And to me, that works far better. I see it with my wife, who I love dearly, but I see she has two phones. Both of them ring and beep and notify her incessantly. And that's not a personal dig at Zena, but it's just the world that she lives in. And for me, maybe some people can handle that and process that. For me, I find that very difficult. It's like somebody just permanently knocking on the side of your head all the time. Hello, I'm here. Hello, hello. And there might be things within the context of those messages that are actually valuable and healthy and helpful. It's not all work. It could be a friend saying, "Hey, Paul, I'm in the area. You're around for a cup of coffee." Or my running club saying, "Guys, don't forget, Saturday morning, we're meeting in Bedford View for our run at 5 a.m. So those aren't all work related. But the fact that we live with these things, these devices that I feel personally are a massive intrusion in our lives. And I go on about it. I'm sure Mareka and Mary are thinking, "Oh, here goes Paul on the go about the phone again." But I really do think that it's a very real world example and a massive contributor to why we're all so fatigued. I honestly do.
Yeah, and I see it, even with our youngsters. I look at my kids and they, "Dad, but if you've blue ticked somebody, you've got to get back within a certain amount of time." I'm like, "Well, do you? And can you imagine what that looks like fast forward 15 years from now? That's the world that they're growing up in this instant gratification world. where are those times where you can literally switch off? And we've purposefully had to find spaces in and around, and you can. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in Pofadder, or anywhere in the world for that matter. There are spaces in your area where you can just go and be. And I think that's so crucial. So we found a number of those spaces, and they really are critical for us. Whether it's sitting with a fishing rod, or going for a walk, or taking your dogs out around the oval. Yeah, it doesn't have to cost any money, because people will say to me, but I don't have the money to go away. I'm like, well, that's not what it's about. You don't have to go away. You need to find purpose in the spaces where you relax.
And final question in this, because I don't want to harp on it for the entire podcast, but do you find, although you're switching off physically, sitting with a fishing rod, kicking a ball around, do you find that it's easy for you to switch off mentally as well, Julian? Or is that a challenge?
No, I think it's a challenge for most people, and again, it's because we're hardwired that there needs to be something on the go all the time. But again, I think what's important is if you're purposeful around it, you can switch off. It's in my diary, it's in my space. I'm allowing myself the freedom to not feel guilty about taking that time off. And if you do feel guilty, of course, you're constantly going to be thinking about work, worrying about the next thing, always considering, well, like if I spent my time in this half an hour doing X, Y, Z, maybe I can achieve, maybe I can knock on the next client's door. The reality is I'm never getting an opportunity to sharpen my blade, sharpen my axe. And if I don't sharpen my axe, it doesn't matter how many times I bang at that door. A sharp axe would get me through the door a lot easier than a blunt one. So yes, it's not easy, but it takes, much like everything else, incremental steps. Building habits, habitual behavior. Nothing's easy. If it was easy, everyone would be able to do it. We have to work hard at it. It has to be very purposeful. I don't go to the gym 2, 3 times and now I'm ready to go run the comrades. No, I probably should buy the right shoes, try 5K first before I set my mind on the bigger picture.
So it's all about being realistic and measurable. And do you agree that it just requires a little bit of a change in what you're doing for that moment that gives you that space to break away? So even if you're working at home, Paul, like you are, and you stop everything and you go outside and just sit outside for 5 minutes, that's it. Do you agree that that's also a break that gives you a little bit of an edge to relax?
Are you
No,
asking me
absolutely.
that, or are you asking Julian?
Julian?
I always say you don't get high performance teams. You build them through habits. You don't just become a high performer. You become a high performer through habits, and those habits are as important as the hardworking habits are. So are the downtime habits. If I gymmed, and I sound like I'm a major gymmer. I definitely am not. But if I went to gym every day, 7 days a week for 4 hours, that may seem like a massively high performing person. It really isn't. I need to understand that my body requires the downtime. It requires the necessary nutrition. It needs the sleep. I mean, I love when I interact with my footballers and the rugby players, etc. These guys, they understand sleep. And they sleep at the craziest times of days, but it's part of their schedule, their recovery schedule, and they prioritize that above absolutely everything. Now, you'd think that these guys are in gym and they're training and they're reading and watching reruns of previous games. Yes, there's a time for it, and when they do it with intensity. But when they downtime, they do that equally with purpose.
Yeah.
They sleep. Yeah, I must say I did a lot of research off late, on sleep, and it's become my first priority as well. Just quickly, Julian, going back to high performance teams or, in the workplace, I'm sure there's many people listening to this and thinking, I wish my leader or my manager was so self-aware or, to have that open communication and that I can bring, my mistakes. But in many, many cases, leadership are not necessarily always there. So if you are an individual and you are in a very high pressure environment, that pressure cooker, but you have this need to be a high performer, what are small things that person can start implementing, even though their leadership is not necessarily supporting the team as a whole to become high performing?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I think, for me, in my experience, ruthless prioritization. Not everything matters. Often
Mm,
especially speaking to individuals on the ground, the plate is so full that you don't know where to start eating. You don't know what. So I have a bite here, and then I have a bite there, and I'm trying everything. So for me, ruthless prioritization is absolutely crucial. We use the Eisenhower matrix. You can use whichever model works for you, but understanding that I need to control the controllables and I need to spend time on the things that both truly matter and are important. Not both of
mm,
them, but where they overlap. And there's a lot of things in our lives that are very important but don't matter.
mm,
The rain, the weather on Saturday really matters at my wedding, but it's out of my control. There's not a heck of a lot I can do about it. What can I do about it? Well, I
mm.
can have a plan B. I can warn the guests to bring, raincoats. That's within my control. So it truly matters and it's important. So that would be the first thing for me is the ruthless prioritization. Then energy management, so not time management. We often speak about time management, but
Mm.
energy management. So managing your energy throughout the day, managing your energy throughout a week. It was true. I worked in my early career for one of the big banks in the country, and there was a guy that I'd always bump into in the elevator on a Monday afternoon on the way down from the 18th floor. And I'd say to him, how's your day? And he's like, oh, it's been a long week. And I'm going, wow, it's Monday afternoon, and the words already are, it's been a long week. So we're not managing our energies correctly. And then setting clear boundaries. I think for me that is so crucial. Setting clear boundaries. A lot of time, especially in the space that you spoke about earlier, people are fearful for their jobs, etc. So I just take on. I don't want to be seen as the person who's not helpful. I might even overshoot my skill and ability. And as a result, when we overshoot our skill and ability, we put additional pressure on ourselves. Our little pressure diagram always talks about, pressure is great to a point, and each one of us has a threshold where we perform at our absolute best. But the moment that pressure starts, becoming too much for us, our performance actually declines, and then we start heading towards burnout. So it's being very purposeful in how you manage my skill and ability versus the amount of pressure I can handle. And then, like I said, regular reset moments for individuals is so crucial. And it may be 5 minutes. It may be just a get up from my desk and take a walk around, whether it's the house or the office or whatever it might be. Take a step outside, get some vitamin C. And sorry for those in the UK, that not may not be that possible, but a walk around the office, a high five with a colleague, whatever it might be. The water cooler talks were there for a reason in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I suppose.
Is there I don't want to use the term quick fix, but is there a way to speed up, as it were, the recovery from burnout? Part of me often, and I've said this to Zena, that's my wife, I've said, I literally feel like sometimes I need a month of doing nothing. Literally a month to stop all the work I do, to put my phone away, to literally not see or speak to anybody. And I think that's often said when you are at the height of feeling burnt out. And actually, a week into that month, you'd probably go, oh, okay, cool. I'm ready now. I don't need a month. But your thoughts on burnout, being high performers? I would imagine high performance people are just as susceptible to burnout, even though hopefully you're managing their processes very differently. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely not an expert on the burnout space. I think you've had some great speakers over the last few months on burnout. But much like any muscle, so if you pull your hamstring, and I said to you, it's a 4-week recovery, and go through the recovery, but a week in, you're going, my hamstring feels amazing. I'm going for a run. What happens?
Pick
I
up an
re-injure
injury.
that hamstring.
Yeah.
I re-injure that hamstring. So I don't think there's a quick fix, Paul. I think we can be more intentional. I think when we do downtime, we can be very, very serious about that downtime. Again, we're working in an environment, we live in an environment that we don't give ourselves the real space to recover. So whilst you're saying to your wife, listen, I'm taking the time off to recover, you may not really be taking the time off to recover. And I found that these incremental breaks, these short-term breaks, are way better, even though sometimes we feel like, man, if I could just disappear for a month and a half or for 2 months, that would do the trick. The reality is a really restful half an hour, a really purposeful Friday afternoon, you know what, downtime, I'm not taking a call, I'm literally putting my phone down. Those are as effective. And I found specifically for me and for a lot of my clients, the bedtime hour or two where we scroll, when you eliminate that, that changes your world. And it really changes your world significantly. I used to wonder, for a very long time why I was so wired, and why can't I sleep? And am I just a very high performer? Is this how high performing brains work? Absolutely not. Until I put my phone down and I put devices down at night, that changes your world. So that's then true recovery. I'm giving myself every opportunity to recover.
Yeah. As you said, I think the common thread throughout today's podcast has been being as intentional on the downtime as you are with the uptime. And you may know I'm actually training for comrades at the moment. I know you've mentioned it a few times. And so often the various coaches emphasize, guys, one of the biggest challenges for comrades runners who we are coaching is that they don't run their slow runs slow enough. You go out to do a slow run and you think, I'm actually feeling pretty good today. I'm not going to run at 6 minutes. I'm going to run at 5:30. And you're pretty proud of yourself. Pat yourself on the back when you see your time, only to receive a right royal bollocking from the coach, because the whole purpose of running it slowly is that for the next session that is a strenuous session, now you've got the oomph to do it. Where if you haven't had that downtime, and I think the analogy of sport filters into real life and work life so beautifully. It's exactly the same thing. Work. You're not going to get anywhere. Switching off just a little bit when you should be switching off properly is almost as good as not switching off at all, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being realistic with with yourself around your capabilities, and we'd all love to run a sub 5 minute kilometer, but realistically, I need to be open and authentic with myself and go, well, I'm a high performer within my space. Am I going to run a sub 10-second 100-meter? It's no longer going to happen, but I can do what I can do within my space. No comparison. Now, obviously, that's different in a true high performance environment where you're trying to eliminate the opposition, or you're going hard at a market launch or an IPO or whatever it might be, or you're hoping to beat England at Loftus in a few months' time. There's very little room for error. However, there's a space created in the training regime in the everyday that mistakes can be made. We learn through those mistakes. We path recorrect. We refocus and we go again, because it's part of a journey. There's not a once-off, and that's the be-all and end-all.
Do you think, Julian, we're now living in a world that is almost becoming exclusively for high performers? And if you're not a high performer, there's a problem. If I look at the world of AI, for instance, that's really upped the stakes in many ways, and that's a whole new conversation for another day. But we seem to be living in a world where you almost have to be this high-performing, successful, goal-achieving individual. Otherwise, it's sort of, well, you're no good.
No, I think there's a lot of that, and I think that's the world that we seemingly are creating. But some of my happiest clients, some of the best organizations, are those that prioritize happiness, purpose over everything else. Yes, we're going to have, we need to be high performers, of course. And the whole podcast is about high performers and being clear. But high performance doesn't mean you're on the go 24/7. I think that's the reality. I used to work with a guy who he would say to me, and we were working in a corporate, he's like, listen, when you go to the loo, just take your laptop, take your iPad, it's perception management. You've got to look like you're on the go. And I was like, well, that's so counterintuitive. Surely we should be able to say, you know what, right now as a leader, putting my feet up on my desk because I need to think about 2 years from now. You cannot possibly be in the trenches all the time.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned, is very important, that high performance doesn't mean that you are working harder and all the time. So maybe as a final question, if we look at high performing teams, what would you say is the difference between a team that thrives under the same pressure versus someone that is, or a team that is not?
So again, I think it's going to come down to the control versus the chaos. You know, in teams that say they're high performing teams, but they just don't hit the mark. There's too much noise in the system. There's too much chaos. We hold each other accountable by time in the office or time in front of a laptop as opposed to what the outputs are. You know, again, last reference to Rusty and his team. But if Rusty didn't have his downtime, if his team didn't have the ability to go and play in Japan and not run at full throttle in URC rugby or whatever it might be, he wouldn't have the perfect mix of individuals that can peak at the right time. And I think for high performing teams, they've got clear priorities around where our strengths are. They define their roles very clearly. Yes, I might be the right wing, but one of my most important roles is to be a mentor to my 2IC, because at any stage that individual may need to start. I need to push them as hard as I can to get them to that level, but I've got to support, I've got to do the research, I've got to be there for them. So my role is defined not only as the right wing in traditional play, I'm so much more. And I think that's what we need to see in high performance teams, in organizations. I know I'm the developer, but I'm also a mentor to 3 others who are still making their way through the ranks. And then obviously very clear measurable outcomes. I think a lot of teams that don't perform at those high levels is because they don't have measurable outcomes. Those measurable outcomes aren't clear. We don't have to overcomplicate it. I still walk into organizations and they've got job descriptions written in the 80s that are like, you know, a file wide. And I'm like, when last did you read this? No, we don't really know what's going on in there. They only need 3 or 5 areas. The rest, they know how to do their job. Regular check-ins, high performance companies, clients, individuals have regular check-ins with each other. We can course correct and we can ensure we stay aligned.
Julian, from eye to eye, it's been really insightful today. Thank you very, very much for giving up your time. I think this has been personally one of the more enjoyable podcasts that we've had lately, where I think there's been some real tips and advice given that we can hopefully use. Where do we find you on the socials? Any recommended reading material other than your own website, perhaps, that you can direct us to? It's always nice to get those insights as well from our guests.
Yeah, I think you can find us on sort of our website is i2ihq.com. I'm in the process of creating a proper Africa website. We take people on, companies and individuals on retreats. You know, I often use high performance environments like, you know, Ellis Park and Loftus, and I take people into the change room and we have spaces there where we help individuals understand what their 80 minutes is like. How do you prepare and perform when you need to be at your best? And most importantly, what do you do when you're not needing to perform at 100%? And then, you know, there's so much to read there. Man's Search for Meaning for me is always a great start. A wonderful book that really just helps us unpack and understand, you know, why are we here, and that purpose and happiness is as important in everything we do as, you know, meeting those expectations and those goals. On Twitter and Facebook and all the typical socials is where you can find me. But yeah, if I may, you can drop me a line or an email on julian@i2ihq.com, and I'm happy to respond. And we've got teams and people ready to assist and be part of your journey.
Wonderful. And just to confirm, that I to I is I, the letter, to the digit, to I.
Absolutely. And HQ for headquarters.
Fantastic. Awesome. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Your energy is infectious. I feel like I'm going to go out and do some training now. I need to check the program first, though. Maybe today is a rest day. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you joining us for the coaching hour. Ladies, as always, thank you. And for you watching and listening, remember, pop your questions in the comments section. Like what we are doing, that helps us to reach more people. And thank you for your time. This has been another edition of the Coaching Hour podcast. I'm Paul Rotherham, and we'll join you on the next one. Bye-bye for now.